It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. The book is called American Journey: On the Road with Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and John Burroughs. Wes Davis is the author. He's on the line with us this morning. Our conversation is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And yeah, if you're taking a road trip, why not take it with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and John Burroughs? Wes, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm good. It's good to have you with us here today. You know, one of my favorite places in the entire universe is Greenfield Village in suburban Detroit, where the Henry Ford Museum is, and where he has basically bought the great American homes and shops and manufacturing things, and he's brought them and he's made his own town of famous historical buildings. And he wasn't really all that interested in history up until a certain point. This road trip that we talk about, that you talk about in your book, was one of those turning points in his life, wasn't it?
Oh, that's right. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned Greenfield Village, because I have the idea that really comes out of this period of his life. I think part of what he's doing there is as you say, he's not interested in history in the sense of written history, but he's very interested in sort of reconstructing the material world of the past. And that comes out of a nostalgia that Ford started to experience as he was approaching his 50th birthday. He started having all sorts of memories from his childhood on the farm in Dearborn, and his earliest memory had to do with his father taking him out into the field and showing him a fallen oak tree where a song sparrow had built its nest. And as an older man, Ford remembered this. He could even remember the song of that bird. And so birds came to represent for him this kind of link to the past. And that interest is part of what connected him with John Burroughs and led to the road trips that the book is about.
Well, a lot of folks will know that name, Henry Ford, of course, and Thomas Edison is quite famous as well. Probably not as many know the name of John Burroughs. Introduce us.
Yeah, so John Burroughs, we don't remember, as clearly today as we do Ford and Edison, but at the time that this group met, Burroughs was one of the most popular writers in the country. He had a couple of dozen books in print by that time, and he was especially well known among school children because a number of his essays, which were mostly about the natural world, as I say, about birds and bird behavior, had been collected into readers that students used in their coursework. And so wherever this group went, children would sort of line up to get a look at John Burroughs. But his roots go back into the 19th century when he was very close friend of Walt Whitman's, the great poet. He was on friendly terms with Ralph Waldo Emerson. And in fact, when Burroughs' first essay was published in The Atlantic, it was assumed that it was actually the work of Emerson. That's how close his style was to Emerson's.
Yeah, and it's an amazing development then as these two men get to know each other, Ford and Burroughs. And it actually, the road trip we speak of originated as part of a sort of a disagreement, a friendly disagreement between the two, because Burroughs, he really believed that the automobile was going to kill America's love for nature.
Yes, you're exactly right. And so Ford, because of his interest in birds, started reading Burroughs. He had a full set of Burroughs' works, and thought of him as his favorite writer, and maybe one of the few writers he actually read. But he then, in 1912, came across some essays in which Burroughs was making just the argument you've spelled out, that the automobile was going to destroy our appreciation of nature, in part because it moved us through the natural world too quickly, and that it might destroy nature itself because of the way it brought noise and pollution into the countryside. Ford, of course, disagreed with that sentiment, and what he decided to do was contact Burroughs and offer to send him a Model T with the hope that the car could change his mind. That's actually how I got latched into the story. I found a letter from 1912 in which Burroughs is writing to a friend saying, Mr. Ford of automobile fame is an admirer of my books and would like to send me a car. And for a while he thought about turning this down, but Ford was probably the most famous man in the country at the time, and I think Burroughs was interested in meeting him. So finally he says yes. Ford sends the car, sends a man to teach Burroughs' son how to drive it, with the idea that he would then teach Burroughs. And it actually has the effect Ford wanted. It gets Burroughs, out surveying more of the countryside than he was otherwise able to do. The two become friends, and they make their first trip together up to Concord, Massachusetts, so that Burroughs can show Ford the house where Ralph Waldo Emerson had lived, and Walden Pond, where Thoreau had conducted his experiment in simple living.
One of the great aspects of the story is when Thomas Edison and Harvey Firestone, because after all, you need tires on these cars, when they come into the story. When you go to Greenfield Village, of course, one of the main attractions is the Menlo Park lab there, and the story is told to us that and we experienced it one day. My son and my wife and I went, and we were the only ones there, so we got a little special tour. It was Thomas Edison was not going to let Henry Ford take it to Greenfield Village because he said his lab would always stand on New Jersey soil. So Henry Ford actually brought trainloads of New Jersey soil to Dearborn, Michigan, laid it out, and Thomas Edison gave him the lab. And
yes, exactly. I mean, Ford would sort of spare no expense in recreating this world of the past. I'll say that Edison, when he saw that lab after its reconstruction at Greenfield Village, said, well, this is just about right, but it's not really like my lab because the floor is far too clean.
Yeah. And he actually sat down on a chair there, and when he did, Henry Ford had a workman go underneath and run screws up through the floor, so that chair has never moved, and nobody sat in that chair since Thomas Edison did.
That's great.
That's an amazing part of the whole story. Since 1927, that chair, nobody has sat in it, and it has not moved. And it's just, it talks about the friendship between Ford and Edison. But these road trips that they begin taking, they become great joys and sources of joy for everybody involved.
That's right. I mean, in the book, I focus on this huge trip in 1918, which goes down into the Smoky Mountains. And for the rest of their lives, everyone who took part in that trip would point to it as the greatest vacation they had ever had. And I should say, so we're in Pittsburgh this morning, is that right?
Yeah, you're in the neighborhood, yeah.
So Pittsburgh actually was the starting point for that epic trip. Mm-hmm. That's where the group from the Midwest, Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone and his son Harvey Jr., met up with the group from the East, which included Edison and Burroughs, and they travel from Pittsburgh down to Greensburg, where they spend their first night camping. And then Connellsville, which I think is also not too far from you, is the site of the first sort of crisis of the trip. One of the things to keep in mind about these is that road trips then were nothing like what we think of now. Like the whole roadside culture that we think of as part of the road trip didn't yet exist. So you didn't have motels and fast food restaurants and gas stations and easy ways to get cars repaired. So just outside of Connellsville, the Packard, driven by Harvey Firestone Jr., that Ford is riding in, breaks down, and it turns out that the cooling fan has broken, and one iron arm of the cooling fan has pierced the radiator. And so it's Henry Ford himself, the richest man in the country, who gets out, takes off his jacket, crawls under the car, and figures out a way to get it running again. They limp into Connellsville, where they find a garage. But at the garage, the mechanics take a look at the car, and they see no way to repair it without ordering parts, which will take several days to arrive. Mm-hmm. So again, Henry Ford rolls up his sleeves, wanders around the garage, and finds what materials he can, takes the Packard apart, rewires, like wires up the fan using some baling wire, solders the radiator himself, and within a couple of hours he has them back on the road. And when the accounts of this trip come out, everyone points to that as not a low point, but actually one of the highlights of the trip.
And the end of Packard. and Henry Ford, you know that he's mumbling the whole time, you should have bought a Ford. Should have bought a Ford.
Yes, exactly, right. And in fact, there were a couple of Model Ts that were following along, carrying supplies and members of the crew that helped them set up tents and things like that. And the Model Ts, just were always dependable.
Yeah, so here they are on making all of these trips. That 1918 trip is so wonderfully written by you. And as we follow along with them, it's interesting to me, the public reaction to what is going on, to what probably began as a very quiet type of venture, but then people started to get wind of it.
Yeah, that's right. And, all along the way, newspapers sort of followed the story. And so in each town, there would be an article saying, that this incredible group of people was nearby. In the Appalachian South, there were a couple of places where no one recognized them and they had, complete privacy. But that wasn't the general case. More often, they would roll into town and the townspeople would turn out, to get a look at Edison or Ford. And many of them also recognized Burroughs, who, was sort of surprised to be recognized alongside people as famous as Ford and Edison.
Yeah.
But there's a great story from the time they passed through Johnson City, Tennessee, which is in the northeast corner of the state, just where the mountains begin to climb up toward the North Carolina border. They get into town. I think Burroughs is first at that point, and he's recognized. And then Edison's car comes in. Everyone swarms around, to see Edison. A newsboy comes up to the car because Edison at this time was famous for reading several newspapers a day. And this newsboy wants to be the person who sells a paper to Thomas Edison. Mm-hmm. So Edison takes a paper. I think he actually takes two, hands one back to Firestone, gives the boy a dime, and it comes out later that this newsboy was able to sell that dime for $5 because it had once belonged to Thomas Alva Edison.
Even in that day, the culture was such, wasn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah.
It really
is.
It's
Incredible.
You write the book so well. It is such a wonderful journey for us. We get to tag along with Henry Ford and John Burroughs and Thomas Edison and Mr. Firestone, Harvey Firestone, and it's a wonderful, wonderful journey for us. And what a great time of the year for this book to come out, too. It is called On American Journey, On the Road with Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and John Burroughs. Where did you find this story besides that letter? What put you in position to actually decide to write this?
Well, I've been interested in John Burroughs basically all my life. Very strangely, I had a friend when I was in high school whose name was John Burroughs, although it was spelled differently. And I guess because of that name, his family was aware of my John Burroughs, or John Burroughs the writer. And so on his library shelf one day, I discovered Wake Robin, which was Burroughs' first book, and took it home and loved it. And so I've been sort of following him ever since. And then my past life is as an academic, writing mostly about writers. But in my previous book, I write about writers who sort of escape from the library or the study and wind up serving as commandos in occupied Greece during World War II. And so when I came across that letter linking Burroughs to Ford and then found out they made these trips, I realized, this is actually the same kind of story. This is people we mostly know for their intellectual achievements, and they're getting out into the world and having adventures that we wouldn't normally associate with them.
Well, it is a wonderful read, and I'm so grateful to be able to talk with Wes Davis this morning. Again, the book, American Journey, On the Road with Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and John Burroughs. Wes, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it, and thank you for reading the book.
Have a wonderful day today.
You too. Thank you.